Early morning light bathed the cobblestone streets of the small coastal town in a gentle glow. As the sun rose, shopkeepers unlatched their doors, setting out handmade trinkets, freshly baked pastries, and colorful fabrics to entice early passers-by. The bustling market felt like a patchwork of sights and scents, a place where one could sample an entire world without ever leaving the old village square. In that lively setting, Lucian stepped off a regional bus, his well-worn suitcase in one hand and a leather-bound portfolio under the other arm. He inhaled the salty air, instantly feeling the ocean breeze energize him. His heart fluttered with that sense of new discovery, the same eagerness that had followed him from design school in Paris to every corner of the continent. Lucian was a traveling fashion designer, though he preferred to call himself a creator of possibility. He specialized in resurrecting forgotten styles, weaving contemporary trends with old world craftsmanship. He would wander across countries, seeking hidden techniques and rare materials, letting the local culture seep into his designs. Some small towns had gifted him the knowledge of hand-dyeing cloth with flower petals, while others taught him the intricacies of embroidery passed down through generations. Now he found himself in this quiet seaside enclave, after hearing rumors of an innovative seamstress whose charitable work involved crafting clothing from recycled textiles and distributing them to those in need. He made his way past small fruit stands and fishermen tugging nets off their boats, eventually arriving at the modest courtyard of a devotional center. This was where people said the philanthropic seamstress could be found, helping women learn to sew simple tunics and patch up threadbare clothing. The courtyard was bursting with activity. Mothers mended their children's jackets, bright swatches of cloth were pinned to lines, and a cheerful chatter in multiple languages filled the air. Lucian's eyes danced around, marveled by the sense of unity and compassion. In the corner, under a turquoise awning, a petite woman was carefully guiding an older man's gnarled fingers, helping him thread a needle. Her auburn hair was pulled back into a neat bun, exposing her slender neck and high cheekbones. She wore a linen apron dotted with stray threads and pinned with fabric scraps of every shade imaginable. Even from afar, Lucian sensed that this woman was just as colorfully textured as the cloth she worked with. When she looked up, her gaze locked with his. She offered a warm smile that seemed to wrap him in kindness before returning to her task. As if drawn by an invisible thread, Lucien found himself moving closer. He waited patiently, not wanting to intrude on her lesson. When the man finally managed to thread the needle, she clapped her hands, praising him in a soft, lilting tone. Then she glanced back toward Lucien, raising a curious eyebrow. "Hello," she said, her voice as inviting as the glittering sea. "Are you here for a lesson?" Lucien gave a warm nod. "In a way. I've heard stories about your work, how you reuse scraps to make clothing for those in need." He introduced himself and gestured to the portfolio under his arm. "I design garments from salvaged materials as well." "I'd love to learn your techniques if you're willing." Her lashes flickered in pleasant surprise, and she lifted a hand to gesture for him to follow her to a nearby table lined with spools of thread. "I'm Allegra," she said, though her name was already familiar from murmurs in the marketplace. "I'd be happy to speak about my methods, but please understand, I'm just a humble seamstress, not a master designer." She laughed self-consciously. Lucien offered a polite shrug. "I found that humility is the foundation of true mastery. Often the real teacher has no idea they're one at all." Her cheeks flushed, and she turned briefly to reorganize some cloth, her gestures quick and decisive. "You flatter me, but thank you. I do hope I can help you in some way." They spent that afternoon talking about fabrics and the reasons behind her philanthropic mission. Allegra explained that she uncovered heaps of discarded garments, old, torn, or simply out of style. Rather than letting them end up in landfills, she taught her community to reshape them into new pieces. Some were donated to schools, others turned into blankets for local shelters. Lucian recognized in her the same fervor that drove him to roam the world, searching for beauty in worn corners. The more he listened, the more fascinated and heartened he became. When they finished, Allegra noticed his rumbling stomach and led him to a nearby stall where aromatic spices and fresh produce were sold. He insisted on paying for their simple lunch of grilled fish and roasted vegetables. Together, they sat on a bench beneath a shade tree, enjoying the breeze that carried hints of salt and rosemary. As they ate, the easy conversation evolved, winding from family histories to the illusions of fast fashion. Years of traveling had taught Lucian to remain guarded, but there was something about Allegra's gentle yet determined spirit that prompted him to share anecdotes he usually kept close to his chest. He told her about the grandmother who first placed a needle in his hand, how he had been teased as a young boy for preferring to sew rather than play sports. Allegra listened attentively, sometimes gazing at him with an empathy that made him feel not only heard but seen in a way he rarely did with others. The next day, Lucien helped Allegra set up a public sewing workshop in the community hall. Families filed in, holding torn garments, some carrying entire sacks of mismatched fabrics. Allegra devoured each person's story along with the tears in their cloth. The coat that had belonged to a beloved grandparent, the dress that represented hope for a job interview. She guided them all, thread by thread, teaching them to mend with care. Lucien observed the detail she poured into each demonstration. He admired how she wasn't simply patching holes but preserving memories, fostering dignity, ensuring that each stitch was a gift in itself. When Allegra asked Lucien to demonstrate some of his design techniques, he approached it with a flourish. He selected a crumpled, vibrant square of cloth, originally part of a batik shawl from another region. With a roll of chalk he carried in his pocket, he sketched out an ornate pattern, explaining to the crowd how different shapes could be combined to form something entirely new. His gestures were fluid and confident, and he felt alive under the attention turned his way. When he looked out across the circle of onlookers, he realized Allegra was watching him with a look of proud amazement he rarely saw, as though he had just performed magic. She clapped enthusiastically. "You make it seem so effortless," she beamed. "I can see why you've gained a reputation." He grinned, a bit sheepish, but buoyed by her praise. "I'm only as good as the story woven into the fabric I'm using." For days, the two worked side by side, teaching, mending, designing. In the late afternoons, they strolled along the seashore, collecting driftwood and shells, which Allegra loved incorporating into jewelry. During these walks, their bond grew stronger, fueled by a mutual sense of wonder at the world's hidden possibilities. Lucian found himself drawn to Allegra's selflessness, how her primary concern was always the well-being of others. She, in turn, was intrigued by his wanderlust and the passion that sparked whenever he spoke about the craft of fashion. Their conversations trickled into deeper territories: childhood dreams, places of heartbreak, the fragile nature of hope. One evening, Allegra invited Lucien to her small workshop above a bakery. The space had once been an old storage attic and still smelled faintly of sugar and yeast. Bolts of fabric lined the walls, stray threads on the floor, and a single sewing machine stood gracefully in the center like a watchful sentinel. Allegra explained how she saved up her meager earnings for that sewing machine, how it had changed her life once she could produce more garments not just by hand. She then pulled out a battered trunk filled with leftover scraps from the past year's projects. "This trunk holds stories," she said softly, her voice brimming with reverence. "Some of these pieces have traveled with refugees or were worn by children who outgrew them too soon. Others remind me of celebrations, like local festivals or weddings. I've always wanted to assemble them into a patchwork tapestry, a metaphor of unity, but I never found the time or the right design." Intrigued, Lucienne knelt by the trunk, sifting through squares of cloth. A part of a floral skirt, a scrap of a man's checkered shirt, a shimmer of wedding veil. "Perhaps we can do it together," he suggested, cutting her a hopeful glance. She seemed momentarily hesitant, as if this felt too personal, but the uncertainty flitted away when she saw his earnestness. "I'd like that," she said quietly. "Thank you." With the late moonlight streaming in, They began laying out the pieces on the floorboards. They arranged and rearranged, searching for patterns that spoke to them. Lucian found himself drawing not just on his expertise, but on his connection to Allegra. He noticed how her eyes lit up whenever they placed certain scraps near each other. Textures and colors formed a conversation, and in that conversation, he sensed an unspoken understanding passing between them. When Allegra's hand accidentally brushed his, he felt a subtle spark. They landed on a design that resembled a radiant sunrise, with warm pieces radiating outward. Before he left her workshop that night, she slipped her fingers through his artist's calloused hand. "I've never worked on a tapestry with someone before," she said with a whisper of awe. "It's strange, but I already see new patterns I never would have before." He gave her hand a comforting squeeze. That's what collaboration does. It opens new doors, new ways of seeing. He didn't linger after that, not wanting to push against the gentle boundary they were establishing. Yet as he descended the narrow staircase back to the street, Lucian knew that Allegra was no longer just a colleague or a friend. He felt his heart stir with something deeper, a promise that perhaps all the corners of the world he had roamed were leading him here. Morning arrived, and with it came a reverberation of excitement. Rumors about Lucian's talent and Allegra's tapestry project circulated among the townspeople, prompting more individuals to show up, eager to see the brilliant traveling designer and the beloved local seamstress. Each day, the tapestry grew, and as it did, so did the intangible bond tightening around Lucian and Allegra's hearts. However, not everyone was enchanted by their joint work. The local mercantile boss, who made his profits by importing cheap factory-made clothing, caught wind of the attention they were generating. Worried that their message of sustainability and community empowerment might harm his business, he informed the town council that Lucian's presence could disrupt the local economy. He claimed that Lucian was organizing gatherings that threatened public order because they attracted too large a crowd. One late afternoon, as Lucian and Allegra were packing up their sewing materials from the public hall, a stern-faced government official handed Lucian a letter. He was to stop any instructional activities due to a new, though temporary, municipal regulation. The official explained that while he was free to pursue personal projects, public workshops were no longer allowed without a special permit that could take months to approve. Allegra read the notice over his shoulder, her complexion going pale with concern. "This can't be happening. We've been helping people who rely on these workshops," she said in a controlled but pained voice. Lucian's jaw tightened. He felt an unsettling mixture of frustration and guilt, as if his presence had inadvertently triggered a backlash. The seamstresses and tailors who were benefiting from his demonstrations now faced a dead end. Shaking his head, he crumpled the letter in his hand. "I'm so sorry. I never intended to cause trouble." Allegra reached out and touched his arm. "You aren't at fault. If anything, they're afraid of progress. Or maybe they perceive us as a threat to their lifestyle." She breathed deeply and then managed a small smile. "Perhaps we can continue the tapestry, at least. That's a personal project." That simplification didn't soothe the nagging ache Lucian felt, but he nodded, determined at least to continue the beautiful piece they had begun. The next few days they confined themselves to the workshop above the bakery, where the tapestry took shape in vibrant patches. Each evening they sewed side by side, leaning in closer each time they had to align a seam, occasionally exchanging fleeting yet potent glances. One night, as they were nearing completion of the center portion of the tapestry, Allegra's voice quivered with exhaustion. "I've worked on hundreds of garments," she admitted, snipping a stray thread. "But I've never felt so connected to a piece. This tapestry. It represents more than just our collaboration. It feels like it has the soul of everyone we touched in those workshops, the spirit of the entire community." Lucian pressed a hand to her arm, noticing how tired she looked. "You're right. Each scrap is a story, and those stories deserve to be told. He then carefully placed that last circle of cloth into the center. And I believe that even though we can't officially teach right now, the tapestry is already teaching through its presence. She looked up into his eyes, tears glistening in her own. "You're such an optimist," she said softly. And then, with a shaky sigh, she let her voice drop. "I'm not sure what I'll do when you move on. You're a traveler. You'll go to the next town, the next country. I do understand that's who you are. But these weeks have felt rare." His heart clenched, a mixture of longing and uncertainty flooding his senses. "I've never stayed in one place long," he admitted, "primarily because I never found a compelling reason. But what if I have one now?" She gazed at him, almost breathless, as if balancing on the precipice of hope, and then she lowered her eyes. "You might regret sacrificing your freedom for me," she murmured. He caught her face in a gentle tilt, brushing a stray strand of hair from her cheek. "I wouldn't think of it as a sacrifice," he murmured, unable to resist the tenderness swelling within him. Leaning in, he pressed a light kiss to her lips, so soft it felt like a caress of silk. She responded with a warm sigh, burying her fingers in his shirt collar as though she feared he might slip away like morning dew. They broke apart, each momentarily lost in a rush of wonder. Lucian cradled her hands in his. "Let's finish the tapestry and then we can talk about the road ahead. For now, we focus on making something beautiful." Allegra swallowed hard but nodded, the spark of determination returning to her face. They spent the next few days in a joyful fervor, determined to complete the tapestry and show it to the community. Word spread, and in anticipation, a group of neighbors announced they would host a small unveiling event in the courtyard of the devotional center. The municipal restriction on workshops still held, but a simple art unveiling was permissible. And so, on a day as bright as a freshly ironed piece of linen, Allegra and Lucian carefully unfolded the tapestry in front of a crowd of curious onlookers. Silence fell as everyone absorbed the piece. The tapestry was a mosaic of shapes and colors, each swatch telling a personal tale of hardship and hope, made whole by the synergy of two uncompromising hearts. On the edges of the tapestry, Lucian had embroidered elegant swirling patterns reminiscent of his travels, while in the center gleamed the outlines of Allegra's more functional patchwork approach. It was as if style and practicality had intertwined, presenting a living testament that beauty and compassion could indeed coexist. Applause broke the silence, followed by cheers. People examined sections of the tapestry, recognizing bits of cloth from their own donation. Faces lit up with tears and smiles. Allegra felt a hand brush hers. It was Lucian, standing beside her with a proud, gentle grin. By the time the crowd began to disperse, a few voices asked, "When can we learn how to do something like this?" Allegra's expression softened with a tinge of sadness, but she smiled politely. For now, there were no workshops scheduled. Toward the end of the day, after the tapestry had been safely folded and brought back to Allegra's workshop, Lucian found himself perched on the windowsill, gazing at her with a mix of emotions. "People want what we've been offering," he said simply. "The community is hungry for the knowledge and skills we can share." Allegra sat down on a nearby stool, hugging a pillow to her chest. "I feel torn. Part of me wants to fight the authorities or gather petitions, but I don't want to create hostility in this peaceful place." Lucian slid off the windowsill, crossing the room in a few strides. He placed his hands on her shoulders, meeting her eyes with unwavering conviction. "I have an idea," he murmured. "I'll set up a small traveling show. If the local government doesn't allow me to teach publicly now, I can at least highlight sustainable fashion in a pop-up format, like a demonstration that's more performance than class. Maybe they won't stop that, since it won't be labeled an official workshop, but it'll still let people see alternative ways to create and mend clothing." Her eyes brightened. "You're determined to stay?" He nodded, "Yes, if that's what you want to. I'm not done learning from you, from this place, and I'm certainly not done being with you." Then his voice took on a note of gentle warmth. We can choose to stand up for our cause without making enemies. We can be clever. Fashion is theater, after all. Allegra laughed softly, a sound of genuine relief. All right, let's do it. She stood, letting the pillow fall unnoticed as she wrapped her arms around his waist. In her embrace, Lucien felt everything come together like the final stitch in a garment, the moment when the design ceases to be a concept and becomes real. The following week, Lucien organized an open-air fashion demonstration near the harbor. He put up banners he had painted by hand, swirling letters announcing it as an exhibition of upcycle couture. No cost, all welcome. Fishermen offered leftover ropes, which Allegra and her neighbors transformed into striking accessories. Artists contributed painted cloth for flamboyant shawls. The entire spectacle was part carnival, part runway show, and part educational demonstration, though never labeled as such. People gathered in droves, excited to witness the spectacle. Lucien showed them how to cut and reshape old garments into bold new forms, while Allegra explained simple sewing techniques, ensuring everyone understood they were free to ask questions. To the town council, it was just a performance, and so they couldn't ban it. But for the crowd, it was a hands-on experience. The lines between observer and participant blurred. Suddenly, the mercantile boss's cheap imports lost some of their luster, overshadowed by the vibrant energy of local creativity. Even passers-by from neighboring towns started dropping in, enthralled by this fusion of artistry and social good. After the final demonstration that day, when the air rang with applause and the sun dipped low over the horizon, Lucien turned to Allegra at the edge of the makeshift stage. Under the glowing golden light, he took her hands and grazed a gentle kiss over her knuckles. "That worked better than I ever hoped," he said, pride and gratitude coloring his tone. She smiled, eyes shining with tears of joy. "You gave them a vision, Lucien, and you gave me so much more. I'd been content just teaching sewing in small corners, never imagining this kind of positive wave. Now I see how far an idea can travel when it rides on the right thread." He pulled her closer, breathing in the subtle scent of lavender that always clung to her apron. "Any place can be our runway," he said quietly, pressing his forehead to hers, humming, "Allegra, if you'll have me, I'd like to stay and continue building this with you." She wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him into a tender hug. "This is home to me, but it would be even more so if I knew I'd wake up to your silly sketches and warm smile every day." Thus began a new chapter in the town's story. Freed from official constraints through creative loopholes, Lucien and Allegra began hosting more public displays, essentially a roving classroom of fashion, art, and compassion. Each demonstration was unique, showcasing a growing tapestry of the community's life. Along the way, Lucien found that his restless heart began to settle. He no longer felt the impulse to chase the horizon for elusive inspiration. He had found a well of it right where he stood, in the warmth of Allegra's presence, in the synergy they created each time they sewed side. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and still they stitched side by side. The philanthropic seamstress and the traveling designer embarked on a love story crafted with every thread of their shared endeavors. Together, they showed that fashion could be more than an industry. It could be a language of empathy and renewal, knitting people's stories into a collective tapestry that gave hope and beauty a place to shine. And amid the tapestry of their evolving life, Lucien and Allegra discovered that sometimes two souls, seemingly as opposite as night and day, fit seamlessly when stitched with compassion, trust, and above all, love. They had fashioned room for each other in their hearts and in their work, and in doing so wove a narrative greater than the sum of all its parts. Their journey was a testament that when kindness is threaded through every action, even the most distant paths can converge, intertwined, and lovingly stitched together, one seam at a time.